First, to begin with, the firm set price. First, to begin with, that firm set prices.
Okay. Yes, it is. Here we are again. Not that we're going to go to lecture 9 tomorrow. We might, but there are other things to get started on. Welcome to 7 August dis&datInformation. Yes, we're continuing on with Anwar Shaikh's lectures on his 2016 book, Capitalism, Competition, Conflict, and Crises, with lecture 8. And we're getting to the meat of where we're going to head. We're going to combine a bunch of other things within this analysis. Yesterday, we reminded ourselves, of course, what the general or overall kind of reason for looking at this is. And one of those reasons is that it provides an alternative, or as it were, a more empirical set of models or approach to heterodox economics. And the way in which Shaikh gets there is by appealing to some elements that needed to be fleshed out, and not that they are unimmutable or that they're kind of absolute, but that classic models, the classics, are still important because they define certain assumptions. They give you certain assumptions that have become generally empirically viable for even 21st century analysis. And I think it may sound like a kind of revisionist move, but it actually isn't. In some ways, we need to acknowledge that there were branching, whole sets of branches of interpretation for Marxism that they didn't lead to dead ends necessarily. In fact, we could say that they developed an entire sub-discipline areas and interesting places to analyze, particularly in the context of mid-20th century history. But we're now in the 21st century, and things are, on the one hand, different. On the other hand, some things don't change. Fascists are still fascists, and they're coming around pretty much at the same time they did a century ago. So we need to sort of work through that. And one of the ways we do this is to have good tools, decent tools. And that's, I think, the Shaikh perspective on this, that we remind ourselves that it is a multidisciplinary tasks that we're looking at, and does require a whole variety of other kinds of approaches. Approaches that, you may say that are anti-scientific on the one hand. On the other hand, you can call them anti-humanist. And I think there is, obviously, when you when you talk about the anti-human and the anti-scientific, there is a middle, and it is not a centrist position, but it rather is a multidisciplinary position. And I hope that you can appreciate why I've done this in this way, and it does support certain elements of my own research. So this is where we're headed, and to get an appreciation, of course, of the entire kind of or the magnum opus of Shaikh, and to use it in its most useful terms, that is, as a acknowledging, like Marx did, that competition is still remains important. It's a kind of anthropological feature, and that it is not as ideal, and yet it does exist. It has dynamic elements, and it is the analysis of those dynamic elements that are very important still to this day to develop models for policy analysis, political analysis, revolutionary analysis. So those are all there and available to us. And I hope you'll get into that as we move along here. So without further ado, lecture 8, Anwar Shaikh on competition, conflict, and crises under capitalism.
First, to begin with, that firms set prices. Secondly, that they set prices in such a way to undercut their competitors, and therefore they have an incentive to lower their costs, because a lower cost enables you to set lower prices to be able to compete more effectively in the battle of competition. And that third implies that firms will have a strong incentive to continue lowering costs, and of course that means a downward pressure on wages, because that increases their profits and also lowers their costs. Increased pressure to extend the length of the working day, because that lowers their costs and increases their profits, and increase the intensity of the working day, which also does all of those three. I mean, the paradigmatic example of that is Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, the famous sequence, which you can see on the YouTube.
Seem to have a sound problem. We'll be back in a second. The sound problem is continuing. What I may do is log off and log back on again for whatever reason. And